bought for us, to be honest.
No, no way. Here comes Kate. Attendee number 1.
Okay.
Looking very groovy, Kate.
You are muted, Kate.
Thank you.
Now you are not.
Yeah, it's crazy. The default is mute. So
Right.
Yep, you gotta select in to be here.
yeah, yeah.
Your background is
My
truly groovy.
background?
Yes, I think I like it. Just give me an hour of looking at it, and then I'll be able to tell you more.
It's actually turning your hairline into a living organism.
Yeah, yeah. If it's distracting, I can get rid of it.
Not at all.
All right, got a couple more people coming in. Hello, hello. Greetings, Sonia. How are you? John Olson, how are you?
Good. How are you doing there, George?
I'm well. You look like you're in
Good.
a portrait photography studio somewhere.
Well, it's an illusion.
It's a nice one. It's a nice one.
Thanks.
Sonia, where are you? You're on your couch.
I am on my couch. It's true. I just got done with some editing and running around, so I'm quickly jumping in at the last minute.
Yay, yay.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I've been having a nice chat with Vince, just getting warmed up and realigned, getting our stories realigned. So
Right.
that's always good. Maybe a couple more people who have said they would be here. I think Ed said he would be here, Vince.
Oh, good. Good. That would be great.
Yeah.
Let me text him and see if he's going to hop on.
Okay.
He gets the time zones mixed up.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other talks today that are overlapping this one, so there's a lot of interesting things going on.
With more interesting people than me.
No, just kidding. There's just lots of things.
No, it's me, Vince. You're the star. Borderline person.
George mentioned that you were going to join the talk today, period. Are you around to hop on Zoom?
Please do.
There we go.
Did that text?
I love voice transcription.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Kate, you are, there we go. I moved, the only thing that's going to happen in chat this evening is that if spontaneous generosity happens to compel you to make a donation to the cause, there is a link in chat for that. You may find yourself wanting to enter messages, but it's very hard for me to multitask in that way. So I'm not gonna have that function open for questions. I mean, you can write things, I just may not read them. I guess we could leave the microphones on unless you really want to mute yourselves. I can mute you if you start making a lot of unpleasant noise. Because I would love to have some conversation with Vince a little bit later, and love to hear your thoughts and questions. So
I'm going to get the PDF set up right now.
okay. So this is episode 1. You are all my beta test in a new thing called Photobook Banter. And one of my favorite things in the world to do is to talk with photographers. And one of my favorite things to talk with photographers about are books. So Photobook Banter, banter being a casual and yet thoughtful interchange with a friend, colleague, Sometimes, very often, both. I think I will try and gravitate towards people who I know I have a good bond with. And Vince is definitely one of those people. So, oh, and the other thing is that I'm gonna, like I said, interest in books. And so I'm really gonna make an effort to pull in people who have done more than one since 2000. It does include you, doesn't it, Vince?
Yes.
I'm joking. But the first one is 2004, so that's getting back there a little bit.
That's close. Well, I've actually done 3 books and possibly working on a 4th. So
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I know some of you have been in other contexts in which I've been speaking, and some of you I've been speaking with for years, it feels like. And so thank you for stepping in and joining. So this is being recorded also. I just wanted to let people know that, so don't give out any state secrets. And so, oh, he's just joining. Yay. Mr. Ed Osowski. There he is.
good. With the rotating fan on the ceiling.
Seen that before.
Oh, Ed, you should turn your video off because we can see you lounging in your bed.
As long as he's decent.
Right.
Do you think he's decent, Vince?
Well, I don't know. You can never tell. You can never tell with Ed.
Okay. Okay. Well, Ed and Vince go back a long ways. So I will not suppose or propose or presuppose that I know anything more about this relationship than is apparent here. Vince and I go back to about 2005, unless that Saki experience was before 2005.
No, I think that was around the time that we met.
Okay.
Well, I think the Saki experience, I believe, was before I met you in Minneapolis. We did the exhibition in Minneapolis.
Right.
So it might have been 2004, because I was introduced to you through Susan Lipper,
Right.
I believe, at the time, and yeah. So I think it was before we did the show at the.
Well, the show was this book. And it was a really beautiful installation because, well, in one part it was beautiful because Vince brought it with him, which is a tremendous saving on shipping. And it also, I mean, Vince is a road warrior of great standing. For his second book, he just told me that he traveled over 10,000 miles in a car to do interviews around the country. So road warrior par excellence. But the other great reason that show at Minnesota Center for Photography was so fascinating is that it took so many different forms. It was as though we were looking at 2 or 3 different photographers. Because I think, Vince, you're always trying to find a way to find the best answer to the problem. To find the tools to meet the ends, and sort of always putting the pictures first, if that's a good way of looking at things. Putting the pictures and putting the experience of the people and the situation before the pictures even. So anyway, Vince and I had a really remarkable long, colorful experience into the night in Manhattan with way too many cups or boxes or cubes of sake in what felt like a speakeasy in the basement, and then a beautiful view of the Chrysler building on the top of an adjoining building in which Laurie Grinker was living. So Laurie had us up to the roof for a remarkable experience. I was also fortunate enough to be working at the Jerome Foundation with Robert Byrd when Vince's book, We Skate Hardcore, passed into the inbox, so to speak, of the foundation. And it was at a point where the foundation was actually starting to think about photo books in a very serious way. And I think Carrie Pickett's book, Fairies, may have been the first one supported under this initiative at the Jerome. And Vince's, yours may have been the second.
Mhm.
And we have a good and sadly departed friend, Robert Byrd, who was largely responsible for having that happen through the foundation. Vince, I want to pull up your website and take a little bit of a quick look at We Skate Hardcore. And I want to let you tell us who you are, basically. Kind of share your thoughts about how you got here and the work that went into that book.
Sure. Before we do get into that, can I just respond to what you? That's okay. You can keep that up. I think that is when we did first meet, which is before even the book was published. Because when I came out, I stayed with Robert as well. I think I stayed with Robert when we did the show at the Center for Photography, correct?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also remember getting a great haircut from the barbershop around the corner.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You were getting mostly the same haircut at that point that you are now, right?
Right. It's just buzz it. But yeah, I think let's start with We Skate Hardcore, because there's a lot of things that are in there that I can reference in terms of the book. But I think one of the things that you said is primary to what I do. And, for me, the photo book is not the primary impetus for doing work. I don't even think about doing photo books. I never thought about doing a book on We Skate Hardcore. The project itself lasted for 9 years. And just as an aside, I'm still in touch with a lot of the subjects in the book. I lived in the neighborhood that they grew up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, for 15 years. So I was photographing in a 6 square block area. But the work that I've always done, my work has always been a response to what I experienced in my life. And apropos of that, as an aside, this past year during the pandemic, I was lucky enough to have a darkroom still. I still shoot film. And I went back and started printing work from a series of images that I did of New York City gay pride marches from 1985 during the height of the AIDS epidemic to 1997. And, it's because it was part of my life. I had two partners, actually, one former partner and a partner that died of AIDS. And I was, worked with ACT UP tangentially. I was a buddy for a long time as well. So when I photograph, I'm photographing an extension of my life and what my experiences are. So I moved to Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 1992. When I moved to New York City, when I was asked to actually run a small gallery that was an offshoot of the Howard Greenberg Gallery in Soho. It was called Gallery 292. I moved into Williamsburg because I had known Williamsburg from going down there in the late 80s and early 90s, visiting friends, became really enamored with the area. It started becoming a locus of a lot of artists who came not only from the States or New York City or New York State, but from all over the world. And it was a really vital, but very kind of tough and rough neighborhood. A lot of abandoned, not a lot of abandoned buildings, but a lot of abandoned and shut down mills or factories or warehouse buildings. So as you can see, from this image, the buildings and the streets were essentially quintessential Brooklyn.
Hey, Vince,
Yes,
can I advance from this screen?
sure. Yeah, go right ahead.
Where do I do that? Is there a mechanism somewhere?
Let me see. No, you may have to go back, actually. I haven't looked at my website in a long time.
Oh, another excellent marketer in our midst.
Yeah, exactly. It might be, maybe it might be easier for me to do it, do you think?
Sure, yeah.
Because then I could actually go to images that might be relevant.
Right. That'd be great.
So let's see, what I'll do is,
You know,
I'll have,
the handball image that I keep using, I just think is so simply beautiful. I mean, and it seems like one of those images that that has an iconic status that in some ways is different than the way the project feels, because the project feels so much about specific individuals, and the handball image is about the sort of power and grace of these young men.
So let's see, are you sharing your screen?
Oh yeah, I'll stop.
You have to stop. And I'm going to actually respond to what you just said, because I just brought that image up. Are you talking about this image?
Yep.
Yeah, this is an interesting image because you're right. It is kind of different, but it's part of the history. It's part of the narrative of the story that is in We Skate Hardcore. And I'll talk about that narrative and that storyline as being quintessentially different than how I approach gays in the military. But I used to go up to this court in McCarran Park and play handball there. And I started bringing my camera up there, which was a Polaroid 600 SE that used instant type 665 Polaroid film, which gave you instant positive and a negative. You had to carry a bucket of sodium sulfite solution around. The camera was made by Mamiya. It had these beautiful Mamiya lenses, fairly large, very, very noticeable. So when I went out into the neighborhood, people saw me as a photographer. I wasn't surreptitiously walking around making photographs. So this was a place that I was familiar with. These are people that I used to play handball with. Not these specific people here that are in this shop, but that's why I included this. And this is included in the book. And unfortunately, I don't have a PDF of the book. But in the beginning of the book, there's this narrative where you are brought into the neighborhood from an overall view of the Williamsburg Bridge, and then a view of Manhattan from the rooftop of one of the buildings. And then you come into the streets and you see the activity on the streets, different people barbecuing, having celebrations, playing handball, et cetera, until you finally get into the portraits of some of the skaters that I met about a year or so into photographing in the neighborhood. So one of the questions that was sent in before was asking me what my approach to making photo books are, or what is involved in deciding to make a photo book. And for me, a photo book is not the reason why I make the photographs. I don't even think about books as I'm making projects, because all the projects that I make are an extension of what I'm experiencing in my life. So for example, the New York City Gay Pride marches, I went to New York City Gay Pride marches. I was, involved in ACT UP and the movement to get better health care for people with HIV and AIDS. So this was really important to me. This was an important issue to me. And I
Yeah,
photographed it. I never printed those images until just this past year because there was always
And-
other things going on.
right. And a year ago today, and today is the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder.
Right.
A year ago today, you were printing an image from that project, right? A 40-year-old image.
Yeah, I was printing an image of this young Black man shot slightly from below. So he's kind of looming in the entire frame. He has this kilted skirt on with the T-shirt that says GMHC, Gay Men's Health Crisis. So he's marching for Gay Men's Health Crisis, which is an organization that was started to provide assistance, housing, medical care, et cetera, to people, indigent people, and people who were adversely affected by HIV/AIDS, predominantly Black and brown people. So I was telling George, before we started the interview that, it just really took my breath away when I started listening to the news of George Floyd and realizing and recognizing that this image was representative of not very much change occurring over the last 40 years, that these same communities are being affected by these issues still. So yeah, it was very powerful in that way.
Was there a very strong consciousness of race in the community, the skating community?
In the skating community, there was a consciousness of race. Most of this community that I lived in the south side of Williamsburg was predominantly Puerto Rican and Dominican. It was a very distressed community, not very many resources, not very many opportunities for a lot of the young kids. So handball became very much like baseball as kind of a way out. A lot of the kids that were part of this group that I ended up photographing over a period of 9 years saw skating as a way out of uplifting themselves from their present condition. Their dreams were to become sponsored, to become professional. 2 of them did. One of them became very well known in the skating world, traveled all over the world. Richie Velasquez, I'm still in touch with him, as I am with some of the other guys from this group of people that I met. But to go back to your question, the issue of race was very relevant to them because they were up against, I guess, a pretty stringent community board that was made up of mostly white people. And in the interviews that I made of them during this time, which is actually in the book on a DVD, in the back of the book, they talk about the racism that they were up against and the deaf ears. I mean, they had hired someone to actually draw plans up to get a skate, to have a skate park in public in a public space. There was this area that was starting to be developed, but they were just shooed away. So they speak a lot about this idea of their position in the community and their relationship to the larger community of Brooklyn,
Right.
was sometimes defined by race. So
Well, and I was going to mention about the interviews. That's one of the things that I see in both books that we're looking at today, and the interviews being really essential parts. Those in some ways drive the books, because the images are there, And we need to have a way to see the images with the words.
Right, exactly. And the interviews function in very different ways between the two books. So with We Skate Hardcore, after photographing, I had mentioned a little while ago that I don't even think about books, but after about 6 or 7 years of photographing in Williamsburg, I had so much material, video, some 35 millimeter black and white and color work, work that the skaters gave to me. The majority of the work was the Polaroid 665 images, either small prints or prints that I made in the darkroom from the negatives, and some of which were written on by the skaters. So they would come over to my studio, they would rifle through prints, pick out one, I'd say take it home and come back, give them a pen to write on with, and they would write down, their reflections about
Can you pull up an example of that?
Unfortunately, I can't, but if you can rifle through the book,
Oh, yes.
you can actually probably show it.
Should I rifle or riffle?
Rifle. Let's see, where were we? Oh, so the interviews function in We Scared Hardcore as part of a narrative that is constructed with images, video stills, some of my writing, the writing of the skaters on the picture as well, and the transcribed video interviews. So there's almost a linear narrative that occurs in We Skate Hardcore that tells the story of these kids, the two primary characters being Richie Velasquez and Yuli Otero, both of whom I'm very close with, and still see them every once in a while. We usually have these reunions every 2 or 3 years. But it does tell, the interviews become part of that storytelling process that I put together. So I was starting to say earlier, about 6 or 7 years into the project, I applied for a residency at Lightwork up in Syracuse, New York, and received it. I was lucky enough to receive it. I was the last resident before they were clearing out their space to actually build new darkrooms and new digital darkrooms. It was just on the cusp of digital work becoming established in the photographic medium. So they were revamping their darkrooms and their digital darkrooms. So I actually, instead of having a 1-month residency, I think I stayed there for 3 months because there was no one after me, and they said, stay as long as you want. But it was there that I brought all this material that I was photographing, videotaping, interviewing, gathering, et cetera, and trying to make some sense of it. Because my process is that I don't think about a book as a book because I'm so involved. For me, the subjects and the issues and the subject matter is the important thing that I look into. And I'm much more geared towards building archives and building historical records. I should say at this point that my undergraduate degree was in community development. I worked as a community organizer. And I studied also as part of that curriculum. It was in the 1970s, so it was geared towards more radical social politics and policy change. So I bring that into the work that I do. So it's really the issues and the subjects that are primary to me. And I much rather build relationships and conversations with people like Mr. Ed Osofsky, who's a great friend of mine, and museum curators, rather than actually pursuing gallery exhibitions or even books. I want my work to be put into institutions where they can actually exist as a full body of work and as historical records and as an
Yeah.
archive.
Well, and when you mentioned the third book, I suddenly recalled that it's a book about three friends, Anatole, and two others.
Yeah, well, that book was a little bit different because I actually acted as an editor of the book,
Right, right,
because it was a book of handmade Christmas cards in the
right,
Monroe Wheeler archive.
right.
But I did write an afterword for that.
Mhm. But
Yeah.
it's sort of a piece then, or of a transitional piece with gays in the military. In terms of friendships within a challenging setting.
Right,
I
exactly.
think the skaters have the same kind of bonding, within they're very sensitive characters, the skaters. And you show them in ways that are vulnerable and atypical in some ways, and then also when they're tough.
That's very true. And actually, one of the sections where I do some writing in the book, I actually speak to that as well.
Right,
And I think it's the text that exists alongside this image that you're seeing now on the screen. And basically, I talk about this kid, Anthony, was 16 years old. He was part of the gang. That scar that you see in his stomach was from an emergency surgery that was done in order to repair damage from a knife wound. You see a little of the knife scar here, in a fight, in a gang fight. So I talk about this idea of tattoos, scars, knife wounds, and all these, even guns and knives, and the weapons that they used as well, as being part of their whole public persona. But underneath,
right.
these were pretty vulnerable, sensitive guys, and we
Well,
still have these conversations today.
Yeah.
Even within Black Lives Matter, there's still conversations like that go on.
Well, I think that gays in the military kind of is on the other end of the Mobius strip, where you have people who are in the military sort of celebrated for toughness and machismo, who have their private lives that are being sort of compressed and shuffled away. I think you introduced the topic really well when you say imagine being.
Exactly. Yeah. And with that, it's a lot of times the reasons for joining the military, especially for gay men, was a chance to prove their masculinity, and maybe their waning heterosexuality, because they were not really accepted.
Right. Just
Accepting of
FYI,
their-
we've stepped forward 10 years in terms of books, from We Skate Hardcore to Gays in the Military, which was published in 2014 by Daylight. So let's dive deeper into that.
Yeah, I will. But let me say one last thing. because
Okay.
This is in reference to that question that was sent by someone in
Mhm.
terms of how the photo book publishing landscape has changed. I can't really speak a lot to that because I'm not a publisher or distributor. But as a photographer, when photographers were always had to put up money to publish a book. They had to underwrite their books unless were the top echelon of the very famous photographers. And back then, what I did was it was pre-crowdfunding. But what I did, in addition to receiving the Jerome Foundation grant, and I received another grant as well, both of which were $10,000, but it cost much more than that, to publish that book. So what I did was I actually sent out a fundraising letter that offered perks for different levels of contributions towards the book. Now, luckily, Daylight Books, and also NYU Press were both not-for-profit entities, so I could use that. I also got a fiscal sponsor of my own, so I could use that to levy, tax write-offs for people who wanted to donate. But I offered perks for different levels of contributions.
Right.
As a matter of fact, maybe about 5 years ago, there was a German magazine that was looking at crowdfunding and contacted me about.
Yeah, I think Kickstarter stole your idea.
They may have, yeah, but I guess
GoFundMe, yeah.
I guess I could have been a millionaire by this time if I had thought about parlaying that into a business. But going into the gays in the military, can you repeat that lead-in question?
Well,
again?
it was about needing to, hide the. I mean, you start your TED talk with it. It's like, imagine if you were, if you had to hide your whole story.
Yeah. So that was the back cover of the book. Let's see if I can get to it easily, because I'm not going to. No, I'm not going to be able to get to it easily.
Is that the quote, Vince?
Did I pass it?
Oh, I'm holding up.
Oh,
the
yes,
back
yes,
cover.
yes. There we go. Yeah. I'm a soldier. I'm gay. I can't read it from there.
It says, I believe there is no greater honor than to serve in uniform. I cannot tell my name.
Right. And the way that this book was put together is fundamentally different than the way that We Skate Hardcore was put together, because the idea behind this, even the cover of the book, if you can hold the book up again, the front cover, has a dog tag with no identification. So the major force or the major idea behind this is hiding one's identity and the ramifications that came about because of that, and also dealing with oppressive policies in the military, and then with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a law, the first time a law was ever put in place to restrict people from joining an organization. And it was a policy as well, and it was the most troublesome policy. Many people thought it was a good compromise, but it turned out to be one of the most horrific things. Psychologically, it really impacted a lot of people. So the book opens up with that front cover, no image, no photograph, just the blank dog tag, and then this first image of a young man in uniform looking away. This next image of a group of graduating Navy sailors from the Great Lakes, Illinois Training Center, with a reference and an understanding and idea that they all look alike. You cannot
Vince?
pick out anybody.
Could you
Yes.
pop that out to full screen?
Sure. Full screen. There we go. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not doing the well, even the font. Let me see if I can get it set up so that we can view it properly here. 2-page scrolling, maybe that would be it. No. Now, before it was working, I think if I open it up as a, hold on. If I open it up with preview,
I think you have done this a few times.
what's that?
Choreograph
Navigate.
one of these Zoom events. You've done a few over the last year, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's because I teach at Parsons School of Design, and
Right.
we've had to do that online, so I've become a little adept at it. Here we go. So this is much better. So you'll see, even the font is a distressed font to kind of, and also the font is a stencil, which is a military font that is used. So this image, as you can see, is a group of graduating people. You cannot distinguish anyone. Everyone looks the same, actually. Everyone's part of a group, and the uniform helps with that. But
Uniform being the key word.
right. And then it goes to this image, just singling out one particular individual, which is a lot of times what these policies and laws did to LGBTQ plus people. And then there's this letter by this one of the subjects, and he appears here sitting on top of some nuclear weapons. He was in the Air Force, and this is a letter appealing his medals that were stripped away from him when he was discharged. So
there's so many excruciating stories. I mean, there's a whole long section in the book of autobiographies, basically letters written by
so
each
they're
individual and talking about the nature of their discharge, and and I was reading one very long one about the man who decided that he would opt out, that he would not accept a discharge, that he would admit that he was leaving because of his homosexuality. Am I remembering?
That was
went from the
probably
Navy to the Air Force.
That was probably Lieutenant Victor Fehrenbach, who actually fought his discharge. And he came out on the Rachel Maddow show nationally.
Right.
He was one of the poster children during the whole movement to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Right.
And those interviews are all at the end. I was slowly getting to that, but basically, I wanted to actually open up the book with these images that kind of set a stage of the intimacy of the relationships of these people that were discharged or who suffered the effects of the gay ban and its policies, and where they sought solace, where they sought strength. So this kind of leads you into this kind of non secular narrative that introduces you to some of the people through essays as well. So this is an essay that was a memory of one of the subjects' experience during his service as a Navy SEAL, having to go to Iraq in disguise, Afghanistan and Iraq, having to go there in disguise with not even his other unit mates knowing who he was. So he was dealing with three different identities: an identity as a Navy SEAL, his identity as a gay man, and his identity as a covert infiltrator. And then again, in this kind of non-textual, non-narrative way, introducing the intimacy of partners, and then slowly introducing the people until you get into the substance of the text.
Right.
There's an essay by Alison Nordstrom, which actually positions the images within a photographic and cultural context. And then you start with page after page after page of these portraits of diverse group of people in terms of race, ethnicity, age, military rank, geographic location, religious background, et cetera, et cetera. So in the beginning, I was thinking of actually putting their transcribed interviews on the opposite page and having that relationship set up there.
It would
And
make some sense.
the more I thought about it, the more I thought about this whole idea of invisibility and lack of identity, and really our perceptions and how we see people really needed to be stressed and really needed to be focused on. So my intent in doing this and not putting any kind of description or identification is that we are looking at the images and responding to them and making assumptions based on what our perceptions are. And then you get to the back of the book, which is what you're talking about. And there are all the transcribed interviews there.
Right.
And the interviews, at the end of the interview, there's a page number to go back and reference the people who were speaking in those interviews.
Right.
So it not only becomes, it becomes this interactive object where you're going back and forth. You can go back, you can read the interviews in any order you want to, although the order that the interviews and the images were selected has some kind of sense of building up intensity as you go along. But you're basically allowed to look at this any way you want to, just like walking through an exhibition and going from one image to another image on the opposite side of the wall and moving around the way that you want.
Well, you've entered this book and this project with a very straightforward title. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I looked at the title and I'm like, is that really, that it's just so gays in the military. It's like, there's no poetic hiding, no nothing. It's like,
right. And that's part of my my identity as a documentary photographer and looking at facts, looking at evidence. It's, it is what it is. I'm not going to I'm not going to gloss over it. I'm not going to, build it up. I'm not going to present it as a conceptual piece at all. It's very straightforward documentary. But one of the things you mentioned before we went live is using these different modalities and approaches in terms of the books themselves, but also every single project that I've worked on, even visually, looks different. My entire career has been not only exploring social justice issues, because that's really, what is important to me, but exploring ways that photography can actually show us what these issues are about. So I use every kind of format camera, different approaches, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't just make
necessary.
Yeah, I don't just make the same pictures over and over. And interestingly enough, I was just watching the series on Hulu, Genius, of Aretha Franklin. Not that I'm actually comparing myself to Aretha Franklin, because I never would. Her genius is, just amazing. But one of the things that she really stressed in her career was having this creative freedom, the ability to explore different musical genres, but still having that basis of gospel that she infused into everything that she explored. And I think in a way, I've done the same thing with different kinds of projects that I have investigated. There are certain things I approach it as a documentary photographer, and that remains constant. Usually black and white. I hardly ever use color. That remains a constant. But the way that I photograph it, whether they be all portraits, even the aesthetics of the portraits, many other things, the use of different cameras, for certain effects. For example, the gay pride marches were shot with a 35 millimeter camera because I needed that spontaneity. These were shot with a medium format camera, a Mamiya 7, because I needed that resolution and that quality of the image and the beauty of it. And there's a stillness about it as well. That was important.
Hey, Vince,
Yes,
I'm thinking that maybe some people might have questions.
sure.
All right, if we let people unmute themselves and chime in freely.
Yes, I'll just scroll through this
Yeah,
as people are asking questions.
yeah. Kate, I know you're eager.
Yeah, in your TED, really wonderful to hear you talk about your work, Vincent. In your TED talk, you talked about how you felt so depleted after each of the meetings with the people from the Gays in the Military Project. And how do you restore yourself? Because I tried to do a portrait project once and I had to stop after 2 months because just simply taking a picture of a person depleted me. So I got it, but oh my gosh, your project's so much bigger than mine.
Well, how do I restore myself? I mean, you're right. I remember that I used to tell people that I, as I was doing that project, I felt like a cross between Terry Gross and Mother Teresa, because going into these interviews, I established a relationship and a connection with them through emails or Facebook, and sometimes also by phone. And when I got to their place, we were still strangers. So the trust that both of us had to give and accept from each other, give to and accept from each other, was really remarkable. And when I went into these interviews, it was amazing. I don't know what it is, but there's something that I have that would always connect with people on a very intimate level, to make them go to these places that were really quite difficult. And sometimes they had not thought about them for a very long time. And some of the questions that I asked, I got a few responses that said they never thought about that. These are things that were suppressed and they never thought about these things. So I think both them and I came out of there so emotionally drained. And I remember many times just walking out into the car after the interview, getting in my car and just like crying, just like, sitting down and just this emotion because of the stories that they were telling me was so powerful that I had to have that immediate release. So I think that was the restorative thing that came about, is that ability to be able to react to it, and react to it, sometimes, by just letting go and releasing it.
And maybe some essential oils might have helped.
Right, essential oils that I keep in my car so it doesn't, so it covers long road trip smells.
No skanky cars.
Right. So what George is referencing, and I think we're all amongst friends here, is that when I did bring the show up for the to Minneapolis for the exhibition, I drove, I think, 6 hours from Chicago, and I think it was an overnight thing. I was framing up until at a friend's place up until the day before. And I used to keep these essential oils in my car. And when I got out of the car, George was like very surprised, saying, "Wow, it doesn't smell like you've been driving for a long time in here." And that's because of my trusty essential oils.
Yeah. I thought there might have been some green tea in the mix there too.
Right, there might have been.
Yeah.
I was drinking green tea. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry to inject that little bit of levity into the story. I mean, it's a characteristic of you, I think, that people will trust you. I mean, it's a talent that you have that I've experienced, to be able to get people to relax.
I only try to be myself. I guess maybe that's what it is. But I think experiences that I've had growing up, there were certain experiences that occurred to me that actually built this sense of empathy and openness to people. And I remember even as a young kid reading these two quotes that really impacted me. One of them I mentioned in the TED Talk by Mark Twain, where, when I was sick for a very long time, in and out of hospitals, and I used to read obituaries, and I used to think about, people's loss and, how they felt, having a loved one dying and things like that. And I remember reading this quote by Mark Twain that said the easiest way to, and I'm not quoting him directly, the easiest way to reduce I'm losing the words.
Bigotry.
Bigotry and hatred, thank you, is travel. Because when you travel, you get immersed in the culture, in their lives, you understand what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what their trials and tribulations are. And, once you actually understand that they're human just like you, bigotry and hatred go away. The other quote that I remember reading, and I can't remember who it was by, is, and this sticks to me until today, is the very things that drive you crazy about someone are the very things that keep them sane. So I always have to remember that. I always have to remember that.
Hey, Vince,
Yep.
are there people from Gays in the Military who are still in touch with you?
Yes. There are a few, not as many as we skate hardcore, because I really spent a lot of time with that group of people and their families, and eventually their kids as well. But there are a couple, such as this person, Joseph, that I keep in touch with. Also another guy, Don Bramer. This is Victor Fehrenbach, the guy that whose interview you were referencing.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some people, maybe 3 or 4 people from Gays in the Military that I do keep in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
This image right here is an image of a chef that cooked at a restaurant down in Baytown, Texas, where Ed and his partner, Tim, and I, and 2 photographers from London, Jonathan and Edwin, went for lunch one day. And she came out, during the meal. And I just had the sense by the way she was walking that she was in the military. And I just had this sense that she was also a lesbian. And I had the gumption enough to go up to her and ask her if she was, during the meal, if she was in the military. And I told her that I was I was working on this project, and all that about gays in the military. And she said, well, I'm a lesbian. So I actually, the next time I was down there, I actually ended up interviewing her, and her interview was really quite remarkable too.
Mm.
Sonia, did you have any questions or?
Yeah, here what I'm struck by, and what I'm like, my sense of the way that you work is clearly like you clearly, or I don't know you, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that you are an intuitive empath. Does that feel like a fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely intuitive, definitely.
Yeah, it's like, and it's so evident in your images. there's so much respect that you give to your subjects. And it feels, as I look at these, it feels, I'm just so curious. I want to pick your brain a little bit about your process, because these don't feel to me necessarily like sort of a directed portrait. It feels a little bit more like a collaboration, where clearly, on one hand, there's safety for them when they're in their own intimate and familiar space. But obviously it takes a certain psychology to really allow a person to authentically show themselves and open up. And it seems to me that you have that exchange with all of your subjects in each of your frames. And I'm just wondering, for yourself, I always think about like where I'm at energetically when I go into a photo shoot. And it's such an important thing to sort of sit with your energy in a certain way and sort of maybe have it match theirs. So like regardless of where you're at, so that it allows for them to really kind of show themselves. And I'm just curious for you, just personally, when you're meeting with people in these intimate spaces and sort of really allowing them, to reveal these stories, which I believe in the act of photographing and sharing that story with someone who's safe and a witness, and then you create a document about that exchange, like where are you at energetically within all of this? And when you come in, do you have sort of like a aesthetically pre-composed idea of how you might like to differently pose your subject at that time, or is it legitimately just whatever happens when you're in there and it's completely organic and you just don't know till you get in the space?
That's a really great question and a long question.
I know, sorry.
That's quite all
Should I
right.
have some more coffee? I can keep talking.
I actually ask questions like that too. They're like 10 questions in one. But let me see if I can, everything you said, I actually, first of all, relate to very well. And I'm going to answer this by saying, no, I don't have any preconceptions. I think that would actually just, I don't have any preconceptions with anything that I enter into and photograph. I always go in and with this open mind, and I think a documentary photographer should not go in with preconceptions, because you're learning, you're uncovering stories, you're looking for evidence, and you are trying to get the story as truthfully as possible and as factually as possible from the subjects. You're not telling the story, they are. So the process that I went through in making these portraits was, again, setting, as I referenced before, setting up the interviews, having some conversation with them, just getting to know them, building up a little bit of trust. But I would always do the interview first before I made the photograph. So I never went into a place with any preconception of how I was going to photograph that person. And one of the things that you had mentioned about this collaborative aspect that seems so prevalent and so obvious in the images was just that. By the time we got finished with those interviews, and the interviews will last maybe an hour and a half, sometimes 4 hours, up to 4 hours long. And we would talk about these really intimate, private things. So at that point, the trust and the collaboration was solidified. And we were able to make a photograph together so that they looked, they had no, no walls built up whatsoever. They had no veils over them. They had already exposed themselves. So I wasn't able to get these photographs. They were able to give as much as they did in the interview for the photographs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Jerry Liebling famously talked about subjects giving to him. And I've always loved that notion of receiving from your subjects. Subjects sound so cruel, but
no, I understand what you're saying, but no, I mean, I think you could say from the subjects, but at the same time, just to just to add one little part to your question, which you referenced, is that as we were doing the interview, I was always looking around. I was always, aware of visually and aesthetically where I could place them that would make sense based on the interview that we just had.
Mhm.
So earlier, I think I passed over this image of a woman sitting in a chair with a gun in her hand. So this woman talked about 20 years of being threatened by her sister, who was in the same unit as she, to out her. And she became so paranoid that she slept, after the interview, she showed me the battery of knives she kept under her bed, the guns that were all around. There weren't many times that I got nervous. That was one of 2 or 3 times that I was a bit nervous because she was emotionally unstable. So it made sense for me to photograph her, smoking the cigarette, which she was a chain smoker. She just, smoked constantly during the interview. And then also with that gun in her hand, sitting by the window, looking out the window. And, I would pose them based on lighting and composition and all of these aesthetic things, which for me comes very easily. I don't have to think about it and ponder it, because I'm so used in my earlier career to photographing with the 35mm camera and being spontaneous, and many times not looking through the viewfinder because I'm looking at what's going on, in front of me, and I'm understanding with the understanding of the equipment I have. I never, many times I would not look through the viewfinder of a 35mm camera because I knew where I was framing. But what was happening in front of me, what was being played out in front of me, was the important thing.
Yeah. Vince, an hour has flashed by.
Oh,
And-
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And
Oh,
I
wow.
think I may need to do this at a slightly longer chunk in the next iteration. John, did you have any questions before we head off?
The only question I was curious about, the degree of acceptance that you had, how hard you had to work with some, or did you have failures with people that said, no, I don't want to deal with you? And curious about, they couldn't all be the same. I would think everybody's different.
So I photographed nearly 120 subjects in 4 different road trips in different parts of the country, 5 different road trips, actually. And of all of those people, 60 of them made it into the book, based on their stories and their experiences, the uniqueness and what they brought to the discussion of the subject of the issue. The rejection I got very early on when I was doing my background work, when I was contacting people initially, I would say that probably 3 people would not be interested in being part of it, to every 2 people that did accept being part of it. So the rejection came in the very beginning. I never had anybody after I interviewed them come back to me and say, I don't want you to use my interview or anything like that. Everybody that agreed to be interviewed and photographed had this driving need to tell their story, to have their voice being heard. So they were committed to it those who did commit to it, were committed to it from the very beginning.
You had to work pretty hard to get past those 3 people to the 2 people. And you probably learned things when you first started out, I assume, how to approach at certain points.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it was done via email but also let me say this. I was also involved in the repeal movement. I was going down to Washington to lobby days, to lobby representatives and senators to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was, reading a lot of history around it, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the people that I called, I was watching the news, people that, I saw on the TV, heard on the radio, saw written about in books, worked with, on the lobby days and other organizations. I got to know people that way. And as I started photographing people and they realized the impact that this could have, they would actually put me in touch with other people as well. So in the beginning, it was tough because here I am, even though I look like I was in the military, I was much younger then. My hair was much shorter. It was like buzzed. And, I would get that question. They would ask, I think 2 out of 3 people asked me what branch of service I was in. And I would say, you know what, when I was your age, if it was a young guy, I was demonstrating against the Vietnam War. I was not, the military was far away from me as possible.
Hey, Vince. Vince, before we sign off, I just want to put in a plug for the book. And if anyone would like to obtain a copy of this, I believe there are still a few left. I see them on your shelf behind you, in fact.
Yeah, there are some books there. You can see
right behind your head.
Let's see, behind my head. Oh yeah, that's right. There we go.
Should people contact you if they are interested, or should I forward?
If they want a signed copy, sure. If you don't want a signed copy, I think you can still get them on Amazon
Okay.
or from Daylight Books.
Well,
From Daylight Books?
yeah.
Yeah, they were the publisher. I'm just going to go through these real quick as you're wrapping up.
Yeah. I am also trying to remember to put the spontaneous generosity page out there. I think I accidentally had copied the Zoom page.
There we go.
And this is a work in progress, everyone. So thank you for bearing with me and for being part of the discussion tonight. And Vince, especially, thank you for being with us. You just, confirmed the fact that you are someone who I really enjoy spending time with and talking and maybe even taking a road trip with at some point.
I almost took a road trip during this month.
Mm-hmm. You almost brought, where's your dog, by the way?
Parker is at home. I have to go up for him right now.
Oh, you're at the studio. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. We had talked about you coming here and us doing the interview live and in person.
Right.
And that just didn't quite work out. All right. Well, Vincent, thank you. Everyone else, thank you so much. I'll be talking with Stacy Arazu-Merfar on June 15th, and I will be talking with Sig Harvey in July. No, in August. Sig in August, and to be determined in July. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Photobook Banter.
Well,
Thank
keep me
you.
on.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Nice
you
to
very
meet you,
much.
Vincent. Nice to meet you
Ed,
all.
nice
Take
of you
care.
to come. Bye, all.
Thank you, Ed. I'll talk to you
Bye-bye.
soon. George, keep me on your mailing list because I'd love to hear some of these. Okay.
Will do. Will do. And yes, all of the above. Very good.
All
Thank
right.
you so much, Vincent. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.